In 1994, workers digging inside an open coal mine near the German town of Schöningen pulled a spear out of the ground. Then, another. Then, 8 more. The wood was so well preserved that the tool marks were still visible on the surface, scrape marks left by something with hands, deliberately shaping a branch into a killing tool. The spears were roughly 300,000 years old, made before modern humans existed as a species at all. For most of the story people tell about ancient weapons, the invention starts with a chipped stone edge. The real story starts with a stick, and it starts far earlier and far more carefully than most people assume. The first weapon humans ever built wasn't a knife. It wasn't an axe. It was something closer to a spear, and getting there took longer than the popular version of the story usually admits. The instinct is to picture the first weapon as a jagged rock, grabbed in a moment of panic. The evidence says otherwise. The Schöningen spears, excavated between 1994 and 1999 and dated through work led by researcher Thomas Terberger and archaeologist Thieme, weren't crude. They were made from spruce and pine trunks, shaped and sharpened, some carved with the same aerodynamic balance point a modern javelin uses. A 2023 study published in PLOS ONE, led by researcher Annemiek Nulks, analyzed one of the shorter, double-pointed sticks from the site using micro-CT scanning and infrared spectroscopy, and found that the wood had been deliberately debarked, shaped, and likely seasoned to keep it from cracking. That's not a panicked improvisation. That's engineering, done by hominins who, based on the dating, may not even have belonged to the same species as modern humans. So if the earliest weapons were this sophisticated already, where does the story actually begin? Push the timeline back further and the picture gets stranger. At a site called Kathu Pan in South Africa, researcher Jane Wilkins and a team from the University of Toronto and Arizona State University examined stone points dated to roughly 500,000 years old. Using microscopic wear analysis and comparing the ancient points to modern experimental replicas fired into animal targets, with a calibrated crossbow, the team found damage patterns consistent with impact, not cutting. These weren't scrapers or knives, they were spear tips, attached to wooden shafts through a process called hafting, a technique that requires planning a tool in multiple stages, days, or weeks before it's ever used. Here's the part that reorders the whole timeline. The plain wooden spear, sharpened to a simple point with no stone attached at all, predates the hafted stone-tipped spear by hundreds of thousands of years. The advanced version, stone-tip lashed onto a wooden shaft, came second. The technology didn't move in a straight line from simple to complex. It moved from a complete functional weapon straight into a slow, multi-100,000-year refinement of that same idea. But listen to this, because sharpness was never really the point. A sharpened stick can kill an animal. The problem with a sharpened stick is proximity. Thrusting a spear into a horse or a bison at close range is a fight the human loses about as often as it wins. What hafting actually solved wasn't lethality. Wood was already lethal enough. It solved range and reliability. A stone tip increases the odds a single strike penetrates deep enough to matter, which matters enormously if the entire hunting strategy depends on not getting trampled to death by the animal being hunted. This is a story about early humans slowly buying themselves distance from danger, one design change at a time, across 500,000 years. And for a very long stretch of that story, the weapon's target never seems to change. Every site, Schöningen, Kathu Pan, points toward animals. Horses, antelope-sized prey, food. At Schöningen specifically, the spears turned up alongside the butchered remains of more than 50 horses, arranged along what was once an ancient lakeshore which points toward organized group hunts, rather than a single desperate encounter. UNESCO's own documentation of the site notes that this level of woodworking complexity was previously assumed to belong only to modern humans, not to whatever earlier hominin species actually made these tools. The refinement kept happening generation after generation. The purpose stayed fixed for an almost unimaginable stretch of time: get close enough to a large, dangerous animal and win. Then, roughly 10,000 years ago, on the shore of a long-vanished lagoon near Lake Turkana in Kenya, that changes. In a paper published in Nature in 2016, researcher Marta Mirazón-Lar of the University of Cambridge described the excavation of a site called Nataruk, the remains of at least 27 people, at least 10 of whom showed unmistakable signs of violent death. Crushed skulls, broken hands and knees, an obsidian blade still lodged in one man's skull, a pregnant woman found with her wrists apparently bound, none of them had been buried. This is the disturbing part. The weapons found at the site weren't new inventions built for this purpose. They were the same category of tool the species had been refining for 500,000 years to bring down horses and antelope. Spear points, blunt clubs, now turned, deliberately, on other humans. The technology didn't change to make this possible. The target did. That's the turn underneath this whole story. This was never really two separate inventions: a hunting spear and a weapon of war. It was one piece of technology, developed patiently across an almost unimaginable span of time to solve a single problem, killing something at a survivable distance, that turned out to have more than one application once the something being killed included another person. Some researchers who re-examine the Nataruk evidence have pushed back on how the deaths there should be interpreted, and the debate hasn't fully settled. But the deeper pattern doesn't depend on Nataruk alone. Sharp force trauma consistent with interpersonal violence shows up at multiple prehistoric sites across that same broad window of time, all using the same basic toolkit that had spent 500,000 years pointed at animals. Every knife in a kitchen drawer, every hunting rifle, every blade design that still gets refined today, sits at the end of a lineage that runs backward through gunpowder, through bronze, through hafted stone, all the way to a shaped branch buried in German coal mine sediment for 300,000 years. The species didn't invent violence and separately invent tools. It spent 500,000 years patiently solving one engineering problem, and the world simply supplied more than one use for the solution.